Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be talking about driving around the Peach State in an EV. I'm Sandra Pomeroy, Project Manager with Clean Cities Georgia. We've also got on the call today Frank Morris, Executive Director, and a few of our guest speakers who will be speaking later, and I'll introduce them then. So as we get started, if you're not speaking, please go ahead and mute your mic, so that way we can make sure we have good audio quality for the recording. And we will have time for questions towards the end, but also feel free to type your questions in the chat at any point in time. So briefly, what we'll be going over today, we're going to do a brief overview about Clean Cities Georgia, talk about some EV myths and basics, as well as infrastructure. And then we'll get into hearing from some of our guest speakers and hear about the trips that have been taken around the state as examples. Clean Cities Georgia, and I apologize for those who this may be repetitive for, is funded by the Department of Energy's Vehicle Technologies Office, and we are fuel agnostic, so we support all different types of fuels: propane, natural gas, electric, ethanol, biodiesel, as well as renewables. So anything that helps us to reduce petroleum usage for individuals and fleets here within the state. The Clean Cities Network spans over 80 different coalitions nationwide. So as you can see, there are some that cover the entire state, as well as just a region. Here in Georgia, we do cover the entire state. And one of our programs is Drive Electric Georgia. So this is a grant initiative that is a multi-state endeavor, and it's really to increase EV adoption and infrastructure by educating and engaging key stakeholders and consumers and folks such as yourselves. So it has 6 different priority areas: consumer engagement, like with using these webinars, working with utilities, infrastructure planning, working with government officials, and then educating dealers and fleets that want to convert to EVs. So some common myths that circulate out there are, that it's difficult to drive around an EV because it's very difficult to charge, can take a long time, you don't know where you would need to charge at. But a lot of this can be mitigated by being able to charge at home, at your apartment complex or at your house or even at your workplace. So if you're able to get a full charge overnight, then you're starting out on a full tank, if you will, before you leave for the day. So if you're looking at planning a trip, instead of just your typical commute, say your commute is less than 40 miles a day, you're good with just home charging. But if you're planning an actual trip and you're going to be going longer distances, then you want to look at where you would be stopping. And our speakers today will give some examples. But you do this just as you would with a gas vehicle. If you're planning a trip, you got to think about where you're going to stop, where you want your bathroom breaks to be, where you want to grab a bite to eat. And it's the same thing in an EV. It's just at that same time, you'll also be charging your car. So range depends on the vehicle model as well as the weather and your driving habits. So as you hear some of the stories today, you'll hear about how the range versus the miles traveled can be different based off of these different factors. And for those of you who aren't familiar, we do want to cover just a quick intro to the charging infrastructure differences. Level 1 charger is like you were to plug your car directly into your socket at home. It can take about 40 hours to charge. It's more of the trickle effect, but if you're working from home most of the times or don't take long trips, then that's usually sufficient. Level 2 charging would be something that charges in about 8 to 9 hours overnight. It does require an additional box to have it be installed at your home. And then there's also commercial options that use level 2 charging as well. And the DC fast charger is what we're going to see along the interstates, so you can charge in 20, 30 minutes tops and be on your way. Now, the difference here with this is that you charge up to 80 or 90% typically, and then you can keep on going. You don't have to feel like you need to charge the whole way. So as we move through time, this infrastructure is becoming more and more available. 3 or 4 years ago was a very different story from where it is now. And in just 2 years, especially with the infrastructure bill money that's coming down, it's going to be a whole different ballgame. So right now, it could be moderately difficult sometimes to find a charging station, depending on where you're trying to go. Here in Georgia, we do have a fast charger station along the interstate every 50 miles. But in other states, that may not be the case. So in another year or two, with this infrastructure funding, it's going to be increasingly available. Now, how do you find these charging stations? So there are different tools and apps, but primarily the vehicles themselves, especially the newer models 2018 and up, have these different tools available on the dashboard. So you can plan your route and it'll show you where the charging stations are along the way, just in your vehicle. But if you need to use some apps or want to look at it on websites, there's the Alternative Fuel Data Center. It's funded by the DOE. ChargePoint is an app that a lot of folks have to use to charge and use the payment option for charging. Electrify America has their own network. EVgo is an app that shows you just DC fast chargers. PlugShare is a really good trip planning app, which you'll see a video shot of here later on, as well as the Tesla network. So there's lots of different options for you to use. All right, and with that, we're going to turn it over to hear from some of our speakers. We've got Jeremy Weber to get us started here. He's been part of the EV Club of the South and an EV owner for over 10 years. Jeremy, thanks so much for joining us.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to, we'll leave it on this picture to start with. I'm going to talk about our trip to Hilton Head that my wife and I took along with my son and his wife and my daughter. And as you can see in the picture, if you can count them all, there's 10 grandkids in there as well. About a year ago in February, I received my Model Y, Tesla Model Y, in the picture to the right. That is it. It's a long range dual motor with the third seat. My son bought the exact same car, except his is white, and that you can also see in the picture. The other vehicle that we took on the trip, I'm not going to talk about as much because it's a plug-in hybrid. It has an electric range, but we did not have to charge it, although we took advantage of charging when we could. And if you look in the distance there, you can see the white Pacifica with the bike racks. It's actually plugged into the Georgia Power charge point setup on level 2. This picture was taken on our return trip in Metter. This is the charging station in Metter. And this is what we did while the Teslas charged up. So we can go to the next slide. Okay, we basically loaded everybody up at my house. And from my house, it's door to door to our timeshare in Hilton Head. It's a 302-mile trip one way. As I said, we had 5 adults and 10 kids, 2 Tesla Model Ys, and the Pacifica plug-in hybrid. We did 2 charging stops on the way there. We did not need to do 2 charging stops, but we had 10 grandkids. And we left about 10 o'clock in the morning. So we made our first stop in Macon and went to a Saxby's. My son and I dropped off the kids we were carrying and our adult passengers. And we went to the downtown Macon supercharger and topped up both cars. I grabbed a sandwich at Saxby's and ate that while we charged. By the time we finished charging, and then we went back to Saxby's to pick everybody up. And by the way, we did nothing with the Pacifica. There was no charging infrastructure available for it. By the time we got back to Saxby's, our cars were sitting at, we probably charged them higher than we needed to. I think we had them about 95%. We'd only gone 100 miles. It's only about 100 miles from our house to Macon. And I guess I should point out that both the Teslas, the EPA range on them is 330 miles. And that is if you drive them very gently. I'll talk a bit more about what the actual range was we did get, because we only made 1 charging stop on the way back. So anyway, by the time we got back to Saxby's, the kids were all still being run through the bathroom. So we did not wait at all for the cars to charge. The actual stop took longer than the charging. So our next stop, we actually stopped in Metter on the way down there again for a bathroom break. And again, it took longer to get all the kids through the bathroom than it did to top the Teslas back up to close to 100%. I would say the supercharger at Meta, it's really nice to have that there. They added it after they did the Georgia Power one, and it's kind of on the other side, and it's a little tight to get cars in there. I'm glad that when we went, both going and coming back, that it wasn't completely full, because I think to get to some of them, once you've got cars in there, you would actually have to back your car in from the street to be able to back it in, because there's not much room to turn around in some of the spots. But nonetheless, there's plenty of stations for us, and we topped the cars up. We then drove the rest of the way to Hilton Head. And at Hilton Head, I think it was the next day before we even bothered trying to charge up the Teslas again, because again, we'd been 100 miles charged, been 100 miles, so we still had only dropped our range by about 100 miles. So there's a hotel there where I plugged the Pacifica in and charged it up. Again, I didn't need to charge the Pacifica, but we tried to drive it all electric while we were there as well. And we did. We were successful at doing that. The next day, both my son and I did the grocery shopping to stock up on supplies. We went to Harris Teeter, which is the closest grocery store to our timeshare. And that's literally about 2 or 3 miles from where we are. And we plugged the cars in and did our grocery shopping. And quite frankly, the cars were again ready before we finished doing our grocery shopping. We then had a great week at Hilton Head. We drove all around. I think we headed back on Sunday, but I think it was like Friday. Again, I had to make a trip to Harris Teeter. And while I was there, I topped up my car. I think my son had to make a trip there on the Saturday, and he topped up his car. And bear in mind, the goal of going to Harris Teeter was to buy supplies, not charging, but we did charging while we were there. But the net effect of it was both the Teslas were fully charged up and ready for the trip back home on Sunday. Again, the Pacifica, I'd managed to get it charged up as well, so it started off. And the Pacifica, by the way, only has about 32 miles all electric before the gas engine cuts on. So it was just kind of nice to be able to reduce how much gas we used. And the Pacifica has a large enough tank that we didn't have to make any stops for gas other than topping up before we left. On the return trip, as you saw in the picture earlier, we went to the Mexican restaurant and had lunch while the cars were charging. And again, the cars charged up fast enough that they were both charged up before the main food made it to the table. So my son and I actually had to go over and move the cars. We left the Pacifica there because it's only charging on level 2. We decided we did not need to make any stops on the way back. So we actually tried not stopping on the way back. And we were running I think an average speed of about 70 miles an hour. 75 miles an hour. And the range on the car from Meta to home, we were probably getting an actual range of somewhere about 265 miles running at 75 miles an hour. We did actually have to stop because in the Pacifica, my youngest grandchild blew out his diaper. But that was the only reason that we actually had to stop on the way back. But both the Teslas completed the trip back to my house. Obviously, we planned we planned ahead with using ChargePoint to make sure, not ChargePoint, PlugShare, to make sure we knew where the charging stations were. But really, there was very little thought to how to do this trip. It was an easy trip, plenty of charging stations, and we planned the charging stations with our stops. And we had a great time in Hilton Head with the grandkids. It was a lot of fun, but it was not restful. I think that's it for me, unless anybody has any questions. Oh, yes, didn't have any issues with the charging, but as I said, Meta Supercharger can get crowded and be a little bit tricky to get in and out of. We used PlugShare to plan the route. That was pretty quick. The big surprise was I didn't know that there was a supercharger really close to us on Hilton Head. So that was a nice surprise. And we thoroughly enjoyed driving the cars. We used the autopilot on the entire time. So basically, we let the robots drive the Teslas. The con is really kind of minimal. Planning your charging stops to coincide with bathroom breaks and food breaks, because the where the charging stations are is convenient to places where you want to go to the use for bathroom breaks and for food breaks. So it was a fun trip and an easy one to do.
Great, thank you, Jeremy. And we'll take any additional questions as we get going towards the end, but feel free to type any in the chat. So next up, we have Steve Epstein, who's been a EV rideshare driver for about 7 years now, and he's got a wealth of experience and knowledge to share with us. Thank you, Steve.
Hi, everybody. So pictured here with my 2017 Chevy Bolt, which I bought in June of 2019. And at that point, it had 22,000 miles. Now it has 148,000 miles. So first thing about charging and my daily experience, I do a lot of miles, a lot of miles. And as you can see here, the PlugShare app shows that in the metro area, we're saturated with options. In fact, the ones on the outskirts are generally the ones that I know a lot of times is the beginning of the desert, sometimes, so to speak, or at least less chargers beyond this range, beyond the metro area. So basically, my day, I plug it in when I come home. Overnight, the maximum, if it was empty, it would take 7 hours to charge, 7.5 hours to charge fully. So I start every day full with what's now 220 mile range, down from its original 240, 250. Interesting, I will use the high-speed chargers as a filler, right, in my day, and it happens quite often. When it happens, because the car gets down to 10, 15%, if I can't accept a ride of 30 miles, I basically go charge. That also coincides with I'm tired and I need a rest. So, and oftentimes I need the rest and I want to keep driving, I'll just go to top it off. Now I say top it off, for me, I charge to 2/3 because my car starts slowing down actually at 50%, and again at 2/3, and again at 80%, whatever. At 2/3, for me, it's not worth the time to fill it, and 2/3 is plenty to keep going. And if I need to stop again, etc. Generally, that takes me 30 to 40 minutes on a charger. And the chargers are at shopping centers, and there's always something I can do, if I want to. Most of the time, I just close my eyes, keep my lunch with me. One of the things about the car, you talk about the pros and cons of having an EV, and to speak to that graph that someone put on earlier, the first 9 months I had the car, like from June of 2019 till the spring, this map was not so populated. There were singular Georgia power stations in around the metro area, but whether they were working or occupied was an issue. But since Electrify America has come and really saturated the area, it's just not an issue at all. And what I like the most about the EV, besides cost, which is top of the line for what I do, is how it allows me to drive more safely. The instant torque allows me to just stay further away from all the other vehicles. I put so many miles on, that's the key. It handles better than any gas mobile I've ever had, an opportunity to drive. The con, there are such things as charging deserts. In fact, there's one that exists where my granddaughter lives in Jackson, Mississippi. The closest high-speed charger is 120 miles. Someday they'll fix that. But meanwhile, I might not do a road trip that way. Okay. Now, sometimes I'm outside of this metro area. We can go on to the next one. That I have a long trip. They're always unexpected. And when I accept, for those that don't know, when I drive Uber, I don't know who I'm picking up. All I have is a name, could be for somebody else, etc., till I see the person. And I don't know my destination till they're in the car or almost in the car, and I start the trip. At that point, there's, you know, if it's a long trip, there's an immediately, what kind of range do I have? How far can I go, et cetera, et cetera. But he has three different, you know, situations like that. And the first two, I had enough to get there. It was a little bit more comfortable, the Athens route, but not so much on the ball ground route. So, you know, in going to Athens, I just knew the college town Athens had to have chargers, and I was hoping to find Electrify America, etc. When I got there, you know, I had a little bit of range as the right. I says, I better charge because I knew that the next, I prefer, and we'll go over the cost the next time. The Electrify America is 2/3 the price of the Georgia Power. So for me, that makes a big difference. And that's one of the many reasons I attend those. And also they're mostly singular. So there's always a sense of anxiety on the way to the charger that it's working or unoccupied or both, you know. So that can be a little thing. It turned out there were no Electrify America, but in the middle of town at one of the Georgia Power offices, there was this, I think it was an old model station, but it worked. And I got there and it wasn't an issue. And I really just charged enough to get back to the Lawrenceville area where there's a plethora of Electrify America chargers. And I kind of started taking rides on the way. It turned out that I really didn't need to charge again until I got all the way to Lenox Mall in terms of rides. That was that one. The one to Ball Ground, I really didn't know if when I say I got to plan the trip or that immediate calculation. So the immediate calculation was it's going to be very close. So I kind of figured out what was the northernmost charger on my route. And the next time I calculated, if you will, was as I approached that, did I have enough range to get to the destination and back to the charger? You know, but I think she was 7 or 8 miles from the charger, 10 miles, whatever it was. It turned out, you know, we had enough because I had warned her I might need to stop. If that was not the case, you know, if I knew I wasn't going to make it, I'd have to stop. But I got there, and in fact, as it turned out, I was able to make it further down to where there's an Electrify America place on 92 there, 575 and 92. So that's where I ended up charging there. The Bowden one, this trip here is interesting. I was really pretty much done with my day, except I had forgotten to shut off the app. So I was in Midtown at the Starbucks to dropping somebody off, and I got another ride, and she gets in the car and she's going to Bowden, Georgia. And I only had, I don't know, 30 miles of range, 40 miles of range. And that was 60 miles from where we are. So right away, you know, I can take you part of the way, I can take you this, that, the other thing. Or, you know, I can stop and charge. It'll take, I don't know how much time, 15, 20 minutes, etc. And she says, not a problem. Okay, so I knew there was a station in Douglasville that I was comfortable with that station. It was Electrify America. I'm not sure I really looked for stations that were closer. But I got to, so we stopped in Douglasville, and basically I brought it up to the level of being to get to her place and back to those chargers as if it was the most power consuming kind of driving you could do. There is a huge range. That 220 miles that I start out with in the morning, if I'm on the highway, it could be as low as 160, 170 if it's 30 degrees and I got the heat on and I'm on the highway for 3 hours. And that's pretty much would be the range. Whereas if I'm driving around town or slower roads like this, in this case, and I'll show you how it applies, I would get, 270 out of the car, not 170. I get way more. So the 220 is an average, depending on your drive, and it's sort of a pretty good mix in general, the way I end up driving. So I get to this Douglasville, and she was 35 miles from there. And so I made sure that I could go those tough miles, 70 miles, because that way I knew I could go to her and back comfortably. As it worked out, when I dropped her off in Bowden, I got a ride from the college. And again, I told the young fellow student that we might need to charge, but let's just see. Well, as it turns out, I live down near the airport and he was going home, which was about a half a mile from my house, and we had enough charge to make it back. So I'm not sure. This is the Douglasville. Can you get the pointer there? Can you see my pointer? No. Oh. Yeah, okay, so the Douglasville, right? So this is 35 miles back and forth, but I made it all the way back to the airport with that same, 70-mile minimum range. And the time to charge took 10 minutes. So it really was not an issue at all. We were having a good conversation, she had all kinds of questions about charging and all that kind of stuff. So it's obviously better to do it live and in person, experiential. So that's what happens with me. I have we can jump. When it comes to range, outside of a huge long trip, I have to go to these chargers all the time, and I'm fully confident it's not an issue. It does happen, like the Bowden case, an example, where I'll have to tell the passenger, to get another Uber if they choose, or that we'll have to charge. And that's a 50-50 as far as what they do. And that's what I talked about, the speed slowing down, why I stop at 60 at 2/3. The same way that the range changes, the speed of charge changes with temperature and with vehicle. So, I know that Jeremy's cars, the Model Ys, they'll charge at a rate much faster than the Bolt, right? So your car has a limit as to what it will accept. The charger has a limit as to what it will put out. As example, a lot of the singular Georgia power stations are like 62. They have to have two together, they get 125. Electrify America has them at 150, 75, and then again, they have a couple at 350. So how fast a car charges is pertinent to charging time and speed, and varies with the car. It also varies with the temperature. That is, if it's really cold, it'll slow down, it'll be less than normal. All right, and there's a different cost. Going back to the tools we use, PlugShare is, crowd sharing. It's overall. That's what I would use if I don't know where I'm going or where is something, etc. Once I've identified what I want, I'll use the particular network, whether it's Georgia Power, Electrify America, Green Lots, whatever, to look at for the availability of the charger and/or for information, about the charger, setting up an account, whatever. Having to download the app. As an example, I took a ride to Auburn and I stopped back at, I ended up from the airport, I went to Auburn, Alabama, I knew, and I wanted to visit the Ray on the way back, and there was no markings on the charger. And but the PlugShare app had the phone number, who it was, and I got resolved that way with customer service and charged, and it was free, and it was great. So it's really not an issue. If most, when they talk about range anxiety, turns into range management. And I play with it a little bit, so sometimes I got some anxiety if I want to make it without charging or whatever. But in general, I just it's not an issue. And there's plenty of stuff available. And
All right.
Yep.
Thank you, Steve. So our next example was a staff trip, which I'll let Frank speak to. And Frank is also an EV owner and advocate for over 10 years. Take it away,
Thank
Frank.
you, Sumner, and Jeremy and Steve. Thanks for your stories. Obviously gives you a flavor for a family vacation and what that looks like. And then also somebody who's making a living using an EV to do so. So my experience with EVs is I've owned 5 Nissan Leafs, and I progressed from the first 2013 model that got 95 to 105 miles range to the model I have today, which is 2019, which is listed at 225 miles range with a 62 kilowatt battery. So our trip to exemplify where you can charge at started from my home in North Fulton. I had a full charge, showed that I had 247 miles range because I was on Echo, and we were going to go down to Macon. We were going to make some stops along the way, pick up Sumner at South Base, Sumner and Eugene at South Base. And then we were going to visit some different places where you could charge your cars in the metro area. Look, when I first got my EV, I wasn't aware of all the places to charge, but I knew about the apps. The car had an app that updated all the time with charging stations, so you could select on the dashboard, if you will, or the keyboard, if you will, charging stations near me. Or if I had entered a destination into the car's GPS, I could put charging stations near my destination. So Nissan has that program available, and I'm sure other EVs do as well. And if the cars didn't, there are certainly many apps that you could use. And Steve mentioned some of the different charging companies that he has used. So we started out with 247 miles range. We stopped in, I picked Eugene and Sumner at South Base, just off the interstate. We went over to the Pivot Center, which is owned by Cox Automotive, and it is a 24-hour public accessible charging station. And you'll see the video here in a minute. Then we went to Peachy Parking. I've used Peachy Parking since I got my first Leaf because my house is 45 miles from the airport. And when I would go on business trips in my 2013 Leaf, I knew that there was a chance I might not have enough energy to get back, because I don't want to drive on the interstate at 55 miles an hour. I want to drive on the interstate at 70 to get home, or faster. And if you go faster, you're going to use up more energy. So I would use Peachy Parking because they have indoor parking, and you pay for the parking, and the charging's for free, and it's just $110. So if you leave for an overnight trip or a week-long trip, your car is fully charged, depending on how much energy you use to get there, and that's just a nice benefit. And I'm not sure if there are other off airport parking services that do that. I'm just aware of Peachy that does that. Then we also, and this was before the airport added charging stations. So now Hartsville-Jackson has level 1 and level 2 chargers in the parking garage. And I have used those taking trips now instead of using Peachy Parking. So we drove through those to the airport parking garage just to show that off and get some video. And then we drove to Macon, Georgia, where we used the Georgia Power charging station. We took a phone call, and then we grabbed some lunch, and then we got back on the road. So next slide. Sumner. And this is the video.
Today, we will be traveling from Frank's home in North Fulton to South Base Energy Institute, where our organization is housed, to Hartsville-Jackson Airport, as well as a few stops nearby, and finally to Macon, Georgia, before heading back. We're going to show you what a road trip in an electric vehicle really looks like. The first charging station that we decided to check out was Pivot. The Pivot charging stations, part of Cox Automotive, are available 24/7 in the heart of Atlanta with security and affordable rates, built especially for rideshare drivers but available for anyone to use. We then entered Peachy Indoor Parking just outside of Hapeville to check out their facility. Here you can hook up to a level 1 charger while you're away and be fully charged by the time you return from your flight for no additional cost. Our last stop before Macon was to check out electric vehicle parking options at the airport. No need to worry about charging your EV while flying. After checking out what the airport had to offer, it was time to head on down to Macon. After about an hour and a half, we reached Macon where we were set to charge our EV, dial onto a meeting, and eat some lunch. We charged at the Georgia Power's DC fast charger, going from a 37% charge to 90% in 41 minutes. The cost was just around $10 to charge, and it was enough to get the rest of the way back to Atlanta. As the iconic Atlanta skyline emerged, we knew we were just about to be back to the office. Not only can you take your EV road tripping, but you can do so comfortably and with minimal range anxiety. See you on the road.
So just to give you an idea of what we used 120, we drove 126 miles and we used 160 miles in range getting to Macon. So that's about an 80% ratio of miles driven to the charge that range that showed on the car. So it's not a 1-for-1 mile driven for mile of energy used in the car if you're traveling 70 to 80 miles an hour down the highway. If you were, I'm sure that, and Jeremy and Steve can answer this as well when we get into the Q&A, but to get that 1-for-1, that needs to be, in that 45 mile an hour range, maybe a little bit more stop and go to regenerative braking. But understand when somebody says that, look, like your car's going to get 225 mile range or 300 miles range, it is under specific best conditions. And I don't think driving down the highway at 70 or 80 miles an hour is one of those specific or best conditions when you're using up energy. So that's it, Sumner. I think we have Q&A coming up.
Yep, so just one more brief slide here. Just want to show you guys some resources that you can use if you're not already familiar with this. The Alternative Fuel Data Center does have a vehicle cost calculator. If you're looking at wanting to compare a gas vehicle to an EV vehicle, it'll show you the difference in terms of overall cost of life, including the maintenance, as well as the charging to gas differences, as well as the emissions. And here's the alternative fuel station locator that I mentioned, as well as some laws and incentives. So if you're looking at getting an EV or a level 2 charging station at home, for example, it can give you some of the different rates that'll help get to reimburse some of that dollar spent. So with that, we do have a few questions in the chat here that we can go ahead and address. So for you, Steve, to make your life easier as an Uber driver, what would be more important? EV with a longer range, an EV that charges faster, or that fast or more fast chargers?
Longer range.
Okay, great.
Yeah, that's like, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
And Jeremy, do you think that your trip to Hilton Head would be the same if you weren't driving a Tesla with access to the supercharger network, or how would that be different?
I think it could probably be the same if the cars have sufficient range. We did the same trip with less grandkids, and I drove I think just a regular minivan at the time. But my son had at the time a 2016 Leaf with a 30 kilowatt hour battery, and he took that to Hilton Head. That was a little bit problematic. He ran into problems with single points of failure of the DC fast charge. He had one location where he had to charge at level 2 to get enough range to get to the next DC fast charger. That's improved now. I would not take an older Leaf to Hilton Head because you'd have to stop too many times. And but a newer car like the Bolt, I don't see that there would be a problem. There's enough charging infrastructure now going from Atlanta to Hilton Head that you could do a Bolt pretty much the same. For me, obviously it came down to the amount of capacity as far as shoving kids into the car as well as range. And the Model Y was really good for that. Basically, I had my wife and myself and 4 grandkids in my car. My son drove by himself with, he also had 4 grandkids in the car. And then the minivan, we had the rear seat down so that we could get all of our junk in. And my daughter and daughter-in-law were in it with 2 grandkids. So I think it's depending on the car, to answer, go back to the question, if it's got sufficient enough range, it's easy enough to do, regardless of whether it's Tesla standard or CCS or CHAdeMO. There was other trips where I think a Tesla would be better because they've got more of a network going, reliable network. But as the infrastructure gets built out, I think it'll be. I don't think it'll make a huge amount of difference. But for the Hilton Head trip, I could have done it in another EV if it had the range. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. Thank you, Jeremy. If I can jump in, and maybe I missed this, but Steve and Jeremy, just real quickly, what is your home charging setup?
Okay, go ahead, Steve.
My cousin installed a 220 outlet in the garage. I had to pay for the stuff at Home Depot. And I use a portable charger that I got from Mosin that I can just plug in and, take it anyway. And I leave it, it's somewhat, permanent. I leave it hanging over like a hose thing. But if I walk in the house, I just plug it in.
Jeremy? Thank you, Steve. Jeremy?
I confess I have way too many charging stations at my house. Before I got my first 2013 Leaf, I'd already installed a 30 amp outlet and had a Clipper Creek charging station on it. Right now, I plug the Tesla. I've got a Clipper Creek charging station capable of producing or outputting 64 amps. It's future-proof because the Tesla will only take 48 amps. I also have another Clipper Creek because I've got a 2017 Leaf and that outputs up to 32 amps, which is close. It's slightly more than what a Leaf will take. And then in my back garage where my Pacifica is, I have another Clipper Creek capable of 32 amps. Both the Leaf and the Pacifica have 6.6 kilowatt chargers on them, and the Tesla will take up to 48 amps. And I like playing around with electricity, so I did all the wiring for that myself. I just had to buy the charging stations, which most of them I got the Georgia Power rebate on. Georgia Power questioned on the second one, is this charger you already have? Nope. But so I think I got 4 rebates from Georgia Power, and they stopped questioning me after a while. So, and I also got the federal tax credit on charging stations for 2 of them. So
very nice.
I'm probably a little bit of an exception because I like to play around with this stuff.
Thank you. I'll address this next question to Steve. It was related to your driving as an Uber driver. What kind of questions do you get from the other Uber drivers that you may run across? Is there any, and is there heightened interest now that fuel prices are kind of on an upward trend?
There's, first off, there's not really a lot of communication amongst Uber drivers unless I wanted to hang out in the parking lot by the airport. But I will tell you of a singular success, because my personal mission with this is to prove that it's more cost effective, that the dollars and cents by themselves justify the electric car. And without a doubt, I have all the numbers that show I saved a ton of money, even though I paid more. I pay an average of $4.50 to go 220 miles. That's against 5 gallons with a Prius. So for my, and of course, there's no maintenance, and it's more reliable, and I was talking about the drivability earlier. So what is interesting is I was a passenger in an Uber, and the fellow had been around for like, I asked questions, and immediately I stopped, because he was a serious driver, had been doing it for 5 years. I said, that electric, I drive electric and do Uber, and it's less expensive, So that had, I don't know how long ago that was, a year ago, something like that. 2 weeks ago, I'm at the Cleveland Street Walmart charging, and here is William charging an electric vehicle.
That's great.
So he was a convert. Being able to have a forum with other, ride for hire is disparate, and that's why it's harder to get to everybody. And there's Uber driver forums. They're mostly complaining about passengers and that kind of stuff. Anyway.
Thank you. Sumner, if I can ask one more question. So to both of you, long-term EV drivers, if cost was no object, what's the next, and maybe you're driving it, but if cost was no object, what would be your next EV if you were going to go out and get one tomorrow? Jeremy?
Well, I worked up from driving in 2007 a three-wheeled electric, more or less golf cart, 4-passenger, 40 mile per hour, 25 mile per hour range vehicle, and now I'm driving a Tesla. So pretty much I feel like I'm there. I've had a plug-in Prius conversion, 2 Leafs, got the Pacifica plug-in hybrid, and now I've got the Tesla, and I love the Tesla. I love the comfort of it. I love the range of it. I love the charging network, and I've enjoyed all my other cars. But if I didn't have a Tesla, this is what I would aspire to.
I thought you might said that, like the Lucid with 500 miles range or something. What about you, Steve?
Yeah, some of the odd ones I'm not as familiar with. It's funny, I don't kind of look at what I can't get, what I don't even have an idea of getting. Although I did put money down on a Silverado, not for anything other than to show demand. But right now, the cars that I see, the Ioniq 5 and the ID4, would be a choice. Although if I were to be able to say, what do I want in a car? Assuming money was no object, I'd want 400 miles of range and a sunroof, and every safety feature available, on the market.
That's good.
That's pretty much it.
Thank you. Sumner, I'll turn it back to you.
That's it. That's all we have for you folks. So thank you so much for joining us, Steve and Jeremy and Frank. And thanks to you all attendees for being on the call and watching this, and hope you all have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.